For weeks, it had been the same look, suspicion. Every time 6-year-old Ivy entered the living room, the dog's golden eyes would follow her, calm but unreadable. He never barked, never growled, but he never wagged his tail either. No sniffing, no play bows, no licking, just silence and stillness. It made Mira, Ivy's mother, feel like she was living with a loaded question in fur. His name was Coda, and he belonged to her new husband, Ryan. Coda was a large shepherd mix, all muscle and velvet, with a coat like brushed coal and the kind of eyes that seemed older than time. Ryan said he'd been through a lot. Military history. Former K9, the kind of dog who listened to commands with military precision but didn't hand out trust lightly, especially not to children. He doesn't hate her, Ryan had said more than once. He just doesn't know what to do with her. But that didn't comfort Mira. She'd seen the way Ivy shrank around Coda, the way she tiptoed around the kitchen island if he was lying in the hallway, how she held her breath when brushing past his flank. She had begged Ryan to keep Coda crated when Ivy was home. But Ryan, steady as always, simply shook his head. The day he's dangerous is the day I'll put him down myself. But Mira, he's not dangerous. He's just watching. Mira didn't believe it. Not fully, until the day Ivy fell. It was a Sunday, warm, breezy, with the first signs of spring painting soft green onto the trees. Mira had just returned from the grocery store and was unloading bags onto the kitchen counter. Ryan had gone to the shed out back. Coda was asleep by the back door, body stretched long, ears twitching every so often at the buzz of passing bees. Ivy was playing in the yard, barefoot, as always, dancing across the uneven stone path, twirling with the pink ribbons in her hair fluttering like dragonfly wings. Then, suddenly, it happened. A scream, short, high-pitched, real. Mira dropped the bag she was holding, her heart leaping into her throat. She sprinted to the sliding door just in time to see Ivy's small body sprawled on the concrete, her leg twisted unnaturally beneath her. But she wasn't alone. Coda was already there. He hadn't waited for a command. He hadn't barked. He had moved. By the time Mira reached the yard, Coda was standing over Ivy, not pacing or whimpering, but alert. His stance was rigid, but not aggressive. His ears pointed forward, his tail held low. He kept nudging Ivy's shoulder gently with his nose, and when she groaned, trying to sit up, he backed off, just an inch, then stepped forward again, his body blocking the sun from her face. Mira skidded to her knees beside them, hands shaking. Ivy. "Baby, let me see. Don't move. Just stay still, okay?" Ivy was crying now, eyes wide with shock and pain. "My ankle, Mom. It hurts." Ryan appeared from behind the fence seconds later, sprinting. But before he could kneel, Coda let out a low growl, not at him, at something else. Something behind the fence. Ryan turned. Instantly alert. That's when they heard it. A rustle. Fast. Heavy. Then a fox burst from the underbrush. Startled. Scruffy. Possibly rabid. It had a slight limp and darted in erratic patterns, headed straight toward the yard, disoriented and panicked. Mira barely had time to scream, but Coda was already airborne. He lunged forward with a roar none of them had ever heard before, not angry, not vicious, but protective. His body slammed into the fox just feet from where Ivy lay. The force of it sent both animals tumbling across the grass. The fox yelped, scrambled upright, and bolted back into the woods, vanishing as quickly as it had come. Coda didn't chase. He stood exactly where he'd landed, ears pinned, chest heaving, his body planted between Ivy and the wild. And only then did Mira understand. He hadn't just been watching her daughter all this time. He'd been guarding her. Ryan knelt beside Mira, helping examine Ivy's leg. "It's a sprain," he said after a moment, brushing her hair from her forehead. "Nothing's broken, but she can't walk on it." Mira nodded, her throat tight. Then something even more unexpected happened. Coda, who had never licked, never cuddled, never so much as nudged Ivy with affection, slowly lowered his massive head and placed it gently across her chest. Just enough. Weight to feel like an embrace. Ivy, still trembling, didn't flinch. Instead, she lifted her small hand and curled her fingers into his fur. "I think he likes me now," she whispered through a wet, lopsided smile. Ryan chuckled softly. He always did. He just didn't know how to show it. Mira didn't speak. She couldn't, because in that single moment, watching the two of them on the grass, with the wind ruffling Coda's coat and her daughter finally smiling again, everything shifted. The fear, the distance, the doubt, gone. Coda had crossed a bridge no one realized he'd been building, and he had done it not with wagging tails or playful leaps, but with stillness, presence, and a decision made in a split second that had changed everything. That night, after Ivy was resting with her leg wrapped in ice and her favorite show playing in the background, Mira sat on the couch beside Coda. He was calm, as always, eyes half closed. She reached out slowly and laid her hand on his head. "Thank you," she whispered, "for seeing her before we did." Coda leaned into the touch just slightly, and when Mira posted the story online later that evening, a simple picture of Ivy asleep on the couch, Coda curled around her like a silent night. The internet did what it does best. It listened, and then it shared, because the dog who had once been feared for his silence had done something louder than any bark. He had waited, then he had chosen, and what he did next would reach far beyond their backyard. The story should have ended there, with Ivy resting peacefully, Coda lying beside her like a silent statue, and the family finally at ease. But it didn't, because what happened next didn't just change the way Mira and Ryan looked at their dog. It changed how thousands of strangers would come to see loyalty, instinct, and quiet love. That night, after Ivy had drifted to sleep with Coda at her feet, Mira sat scrolling through her phone, unable to shake the image in her mind. Her daughter flat on the ground, and that dog once so distant, standing like a warrior between her and danger. She'd never posted much online before, maybe the occasional birthday or holiday photo, but this time felt different. There was something about the way Coda had moved, not out of panic, but purpose, that deserved to be remembered. So, on a whim, she uploaded a short clip from their backyard camera, the moment the fox lunged into the yard, and the way Coda reacted without hesitation. She typed a simple caption. "We thought he didn't like kids. Today he proved us all wrong." Within an hour, her phone wouldn't stop buzzing. By morning, the video had crossed 100,000 views. Comment after comment flooded in, mothers saying they cried watching it, veterans recognizing the precision of Coda's movement, dog trainers in awe of the restraint and control he displayed. A few animal behaviorists even reached out asking for permission to analyze the footage for educational purposes. And then the news outlets called. Mira never meant for it to become a headline, but the story was undeniable. A stoic former K9 thought to be aloof around children, had not only defended a little girl from a wild animal, but had shown a level of protection that hinted at something deeper. He hadn't been ignoring Ivy all this time. He'd been watching, learning, waiting, and when the moment came, he chose her without question. But not everyone understood. Some of the online chatter turned critical. Why wasn't the yard secured better? Why leave a child alone outside? That fox could have had rabies. Mira tried not to read those. She knew the truth. Ivy hadn't been left alone. It had happened in seconds. Life doesn't always come with warning labels. What mattered was that Coda had been there. Still, something gnawed at Mira. The way he'd growled, not at Ryan, not at her, but at the fence, before the fox appeared. He hadn't just reacted. He'd sensed it coming. Over the next few days, Ivy's sprain healed faster than expected. She joked that Coda was her bodyguard now. She refused to let him out of her sight. If he got up to stretch, she followed him. If he lay by the door, she curled up beside him on the rug with her books. Coda never flinched. He never pulled away. He had opened a door, and now that Ivy had stepped through, he let her stay. It was the first time Mira had seen her daughter, so peaceful around an animal. No more tiptoes, no more nervous glances, and Coda, for all his size and strength, had begun to soften in response. His tail wagged when she called his name. He trotted to her when she offered him treats. And one evening, when Ivy fell asleep on the couch, her arm draped across his shoulders, Mira took a picture. The same dog who had once avoided all contact, now curled protectively around a child who had feared him. But what no one saw, what Mira would only discover later, was that something had shifted in Coda too. Ryan came in late, one evening from the garage, holding a dusty box he hadn't touched in years. Inside were photos, dog tags, a folded American flag, and a thick leather collar with a worn brass nameplate. "Coda's not his real name," he said, gently setting the box on the table. Mira looked up, startled. "What do you mean?" "His name was Samson," Ryan said quietly. "But after the last deployment, I had to let go of that part of his life. He'd been through too much. I renamed him, tried to give him peace. She looked at the old collar. What happened out there? Ryan's eyes turned toward the door, where Coda lay watching Ivy flip through a picture book. He exhaled. He lost his handler, a kid, just 22. They were inseparable. The boy died saving 3 others in an ambush. Coda never left the, spot where he fell. They had to drag him away. After that, he wouldn't bond with anyone. Mira felt her throat tighten. So that's why. Ryan nodded. I thought he was done connecting. Until Ivy. Later that night, when Ivy had gone to bed, Mira walked out to the porch where Coda sat beside the swing. She didn't say anything at first, just sat down quietly. You've lost more than we knew, she whispered after a while. But thank you for choosing her. Coda didn't look at her, but his ears turned slightly toward her voice. That was enough. The following day, another clip went viral. This time, it wasn't Mira's doing. A neighbor had captured a moment through their back fence, one of those unexpected snapshots that speaks volumes without context. Ivy was holding Coda's paw in her lap, whispering something only he could hear. Then she laughed. Coda didn't move, but his eyes closed slowly, and his whole body relaxed, like he was finally home. The caption read, "They say dogs never forget. Maybe kids don't either." And just like that, the story of the dog who once seemed too guarded, too cold, too distant, became a symbol for something else entirely. Not every connection is instant. Some are built silently, in the background, through presence and patience, and sometimes the ones who seem like they're doing nothing at all are actually doing everything that matters. The next week was a blur. Mira could hardly keep up with the messages flooding in. Her inbox was packed with media requests, local anchors, national morning shows, even an international podcast asking if she and Ivy could share the story of the silent dog who became a hero. But it wasn't just the attention that overwhelmed her. It was the stories that poured in with it. Messages from people all over the world. A teacher from Utah wrote about a child who hadn't spoken for months after losing her sibling, but after seeing Ivy and Coda, she asked for a therapy dog. A soldier from Germany said he cried watching the video and that Coda reminded him of his own canine partner he'd been forced to leave behind. Dozens of parents wrote Mira personally to say how they judged their own dogs too quickly. But what Mira kept coming back to was the question she couldn't shake. Had Coda been waiting for this the entire time? He hadn't barked. He hadn't begged for trust or affection. But from the moment he arrived, he'd chosen to stay near Ivy, even if from a distance. And when the moment came, he hadn't hesitated. That wasn't luck. That was loyalty. The local shelter where Coda had first been surrendered saw the video too. One of the volunteers who had once walked him wrote Mira a message that made her eyes sting. It read, "He never made a sound in the kennel, but when we walked him by the daycare building next door, he always stopped and stared at the kids playing outside. Not barking, not whining, just watching, like he wanted to understand them." The words hit Mira like a brick. She sat at the kitchen table that night long after everyone had gone to bed. Ivy was curled on the couch with Coda beside her, her head resting on his chest, rising and falling with his slow, rhythmic breaths. The same dog who had once stalked hallways like a ghost now slept with his legs stretched out and his nose pressed gently against her shoulder. She looked at Ryan. "You knew this about him all along, didn't you?" He nodded. "I didn't know how he'd show it, but I always knew he had more to give." Mira reached for her tea, voice low. He waited for her. Ryan said nothing, but the weight in his expression said it all. That weekend, Ivy was invited to a children's segment on a popular talk show. Mira hesitated at first. Wasn't it too much attention? But Ivy was excited, and more than that, she wanted to talk about Coda. Not because of the fame, but because of what he meant to her. The studio was loud, bright, and buzzing with noise that made Mira's stomach twist. Ivy, however, seemed calm. She clutched Coda's leash tightly and looked up at him before they were called onto the stage. "Are you ready, buddy?" Coda looked back at her and blinked once, then sat down obediently. When they walked out, the applause was thunderous, but Coda didn't flinch. He walked beside Ivy like he'd been doing it all his life, scanning the stage not for threats, but for reassurance that Ivy was safe. As the cameras rolled, Ivy told the story in her own words, simple, clear, and honest. How she thought he didn't like her, how he never played, how he'd just watch, and then how everything changed. "He saved me," she said, her voice small, but firm. "And now he's my best friend." When the segment aired, the internet exploded again. But it was what happened the next day that none of them expected. A woman named Clara sent an email to Mira that began with, "I think I knew Coda." Before you did, attached was a photo. It was blurry, old, and slightly faded, but unmistakable. A younger Coda, sitting beside a boy in military fatigues on a dirt road. The boy was smiling, leaning against Coda like they were born tethered. Clara was the sister of the soldier. His name was Jamie. Coda had been his partner overseas. After Jamie was killed in a blast during his second tour, Coda had been shipped back to the States and eventually surrendered to a shelter, classified as unfit for reassignment due to trauma and handler loss. He stopped eating after. "Jamie died," Clara wrote. "They said he wouldn't bond again, but I've watched the videos of your daughter, and I think maybe Jamie sent her to him, or him to her." Mira read the message 3 times. Then she quietly went to the backyard where Ivy was playing on a blanket, Coda resting at her side. She knelt, wrapped her arms around the dog's neck, and whispered into his ear, "You didn't lose him. You just found her." That evening, Mira shared Clara's message, without the personal details, with her followers, alongside a single line. "Some bonds are built in war, some are built in play, and some are just meant to be, no matter how long it takes." Within days, shelters around the country began posting their own Coda files, stories of misunderstood, quiet, or withdrawn dogs who were still waiting. Volunteers tagged Mira in dozens of adoption updates, often with captions like, "We gave him a chance because of Coda." And just like that, what started as a quiet moment in a backyard turned into something far greater, a reminder that the quiet ones are watching, that trust doesn't always wag its tail, and that sometimes, when a little girl falls and a silent dog moves, the whole world gets to its feet to listen. By the start of autumn, Coda was no longer just a dog in the neighborhood. He was a symbol. Local newspapers dubbed him the Guardian Shepherd. Children drew him in sidewalk chalk near the school playground, and the animal shelter downtown hung a poster with his photo that simply read, "Never underestimate the quiet ones." But none of that fame ever touched the way Coda lived. He still trotted beside Ivy each morning to the corner where her school bus arrived, still waited patiently on the porch when she returned, and still curled around her like a shield every night when she fell asleep reading books about brave knights and loyal wolves. He didn't know he had gone viral. He didn't know the world now saw him as a hero. All he knew was that he had a little girl to protect, and that was enough. But Mira had begun to notice something else, a slowness in his steps, a hesitation in his movements that hadn't been there in the summer. Coda still responded quickly when Ivy needed him, but the in-between moments were different now. When he sat down, he took longer to stand. When he climbed the porch steps, there was a slight catch in his back leg. Ryan said it was probably just age catching up. "He's not a puppy anymore," he reminded her, his voice calm but distant, as if saying it out loud made it too real. Still, Mira couldn't ignore it. Coda had spent his life being strong, silent, alert, dependable. But even the strongest hearts wear down. One morning, when Ivy was at school, Mira sat down beside him on the rug and gently brushed behind his ears. "You've done more than we ever deserved," she whispered. Coda leaned into her touch, pressing his head into her lap with a sigh. She knew dogs didn't understand words the way people did, but somehow she also knew he understood everything she meant. That weekend, something happened that none of them were prepared for. Ivy was invited to a fall festival at the elementary school. It was a community-wide event, with bounce houses, games, crafts, and a little pet parade for kids to bring their animals dressed in costumes. Ivy, of course, wanted to bring Coda. She even picked out a small knight's tunic for him, silver gray with a soft felt cape and a tiny fabric sword looped to the side. "He's the bravest knight," she declared, beaming as she helped fasten the costume. Mira hesitated. "Maybe it's too much for him now, sweetheart." But Ivy was already kneeling beside Coda, her arms around his neck. "Only if he wants to," she whispered to him. And Coda, slow but steady, got up and wagged his tail once. The festival was bright and busy, filled with music and laughter. The pet parade lined up near the front entrance, and Ivy proudly walked beside Coda, holding his leash like it was a ribbon of gold. People clapped as they passed. More than a few recognized him and called out his name. And Coda, ever stoic, didn't react with barking or tricks. He simply walked beside Ivy like a sentinel. But halfway through the parade, just as they rounded the booth near the pumpkin patch, Coda paused. Mira saw it instantly. His back leg trembled. His chest heaved in a way that wasn't normal. Then he sat down. Ivy stopped with him, kneeling beside him with a worried glance. "Coda," she said softly. Mira and Ryan reached them within seconds. Ryan knelt and felt under Coda's ribs. He's winded. Maybe his heart's racing. Mira crouched down beside Ivy and smoothed her hair back. "It's okay, baby. Let's give him a rest." But Coda didn't rest. After a long pause, he stood back up. His legs were unsteady, but his eyes were fixed on Ivy. Then he leaned forward and licked her cheek once. Ivy laughed through her worry. "He's telling me he's okay." But Mira wasn't so sure. That night, they took Coda to the emergency vet. The exam room was cold, too bright, and filled with the kind of silence that hurts more than any noise. After an ultrasound and EKG, the vet returned with a look that Mira didn't want to understand. Heart failure. Mild now, but progressing. Manageable with medication, rest, and careful monitoring. "He's not in pain," the vet assured them. "But he's reaching the season of his life where slowing down isn't just natural, it's necessary." On the ride home, Ivy was quiet in the back seat, her hand resting on Coda's side. He had curled up across the seat like nothing had changed. But Mira knew everything had. Over the next few weeks, their routine shifted. Shorter walks, slower mornings, more cuddles, and less play. Ivy adjusted beautifully. She didn't complain. She didn't ask for the long games in the yard anymore. She just stayed close. Sometimes she'd read aloud next to him. Sometimes she just lay there, tracing patterns into the fur along his back. "He's not sick," she told Mira one night. "He's just tired from loving so big." And maybe that was it. Coda had carried a lifetime of weight, grief, duty, silence, and eventually love. He'd waited through trauma, through distance, through uncertainty. And now, in the safety of a little girl's laughter and a family's gentle home, he was finally letting himself exhale. But deep down, Mira knew the hardest part was still to come. And when it did, none of them would be ready. But for now, while the leaves still fell and the air still held warmth, they had each other. And Coda, tired but steady, was still there, still watching, still guarding, still choosing to stay. The first snow came earlier than expected. It dusted the rooftops and wrapped the quiet town in a hushed stillness that made the world feel gentler somehow. Inside the house, everything smelled like cinnamon and pine. Ivy was curled on the floor beside the fireplace, drawing with colored pencils while Coda lay behind her, head resting on his paws, his breathing slower now, softer. Mira sat in the armchair, pretending to read, though she never turned a page. She couldn't take her eyes off him, not when she knew what was coming. They had known for weeks. The vet had explained gently that the medication was only buying time, that Coda's heart was doing its best to keep up but had started to skip more often, slower each day. He still ate, still followed Ivy from room to room, still lifted his head when she called him. But now, when he lay down, he rarely got back up without help. Ryan had built a small ramp to the porch and moved Coda's bed closer to the fireplace, where the warmth seemed to comfort his tired bones. And Ivy, wise beyond her years, never asked for more than he could give. She simply stayed near, reading to him, singing softly when she thought no one was listening. That evening, as the snow began to fall heavier outside, Ivy came and sat between Mira and Ryan with her favorite book in her lap. "Can I read it to Coda one more time?" she asked. Mira nodded, her voice caught behind her throat. Ivy went to Coda's bed and laid beside him, carefully resting her hand on his shoulder. "You always liked this one," she whispered. It was a story about a brave dog who guarded a little girl while she slept and chased shadows away with nothing but his heart. Halfway through, her voice faltered. She paused, looked at Coda, and then rested her forehead gently against his. "I love you," she said, barely above a whisper. "You were never scary, just waiting." Coda blinked slowly, his eyes heavy, his chest rising in steady, shallow breaths. That night he didn't wake up. Mira found them early the next morning, two figures curled together beneath the soft light of the fire, one breathing, one still. Ivy's arm draped gently across Coda's chest, her face resting near his. There was no fear, no panic, just peace. Ryan carried him out wrapped in Ivy's favorite blanket, the one she'd insisted he always lay on. They buried him beneath the old oak tree in the backyard, the one that turned golden every autumn and dropped leaves like quiet prayers. Ivy helped press his favorite toy into the soil, along with a ribbon from the night costume she'd once made him wear. They didn't speak much for a few days. Grief settled over the house, not like a storm, but like snow, soft and constant, muffling everything beneath its weight. But then something remarkable happened. 3 days later, Mira received a letter. It came from the shelter where Koda had been taken in years ago. The staff had followed his story. They sent their condolences and included something else, a list of recently surrendered dogs that hadn't responded to anyone. Most were silent, withdrawn, the kind no one wanted. At the bottom of the note was a line written in pen. There might be another quiet heart waiting. Mira showed the letter to Ivy. She read it silently, then looked up and asked, "Do you think Koda would want us to?" Mira knelt beside her and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. "I think Koda waited for someone who needed him, and now, maybe someone else is waiting for you." A week later, they visited the shelter. Among the kennels sat a small, black dog with one torn ear and a deep scar across his back. He didn't bark, didn't jump, just stared at them as they approached, blinking slowly, calmly. Ivy crouched down in front of his gate and held out her hand. The dog stepped forward, not fast, not eager, just sure. He pressed his nose gently into her palm and let out a soft breath. Ryan whispered, "Looks like someone's ready." They brought him home that day. Ivy named him Knight, not because he reminded her of Koda, but because she knew now what real knights looked like. They didn't always wear armor. Sometimes they walked on 4 legs, waited in silence, and gave everything they had without asking for anything in return. Months later, Mira finally finished the photo book she'd been building for Ivy. On the last page, she placed her favorite image, Ivy and Koda, lying in the grass, their eyes locked like they were telling secrets only they understood. Beneath it, she wrote one sentence, "Some dogs don't come to stay. They come to teach us how to love, and then they make space for us to do it again." And so, in a little house with soft snow falling outside, one love ended and another began, not in replacement, but in remembrance. Because Koda hadn't just saved Ivy that day in the yard, he had saved them all, by choosing to love when no one expected him to, by waiting long enough to become her hero, and by showing the world that even the quietest hearts can echo the loudest across time.